Have you ever wondered what happens to a message when there's no one left to read it? When the last human heart stops beating, and silence becomes our only language? For 6 centuries, the stars kept quiet. Empires rose, species evolved beyond emotion, and memory itself became data. But then, a signal appeared. Weak, ancient, human. It wasn't a distress call. It was a letter, written by the last man alive, Elias Ward. Not to beg, not to warn, but simply to be heard. Some said it was meaningless. Others said it was contamination. But when they read his words, entire civilizations began to feel, for the first time in 40,000 years. Because humans never built monuments to power, they built them to hope. And even at the edge of extinction, they whispered the same impossible truth. We were here. Before we begin, subscribe, like, and tell me from which city or planet you're watching this. This story explores one of humanity's greatest paradoxes: why meaning matters more than survival. The air tasted like rust and failure. Elias Ward sat before the flickering terminal of Arca Solis, watching the life support systems bleed out their final percentages. The display read 3% capacity, 47 hours remaining. The numbers didn't lie. They never did. He was 117 years old, and he was the last human being alive. The station groaned around him, a dying whale singing its final song into the void. Through the observation port, the binary stars of Narine's Reach painted everything in amber and ice blue. Beautiful, meaningless. He'd watched those stars for 3 years now, ever since Maya died. 3 years of conversations with ghosts. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He'd spent his life writing reports, maintaining logs, cataloging the slow extinction of his species. The official archive of the Terran Confederation listed one final entry: population total, 1. Elias Ward. He'd been the one to type those words. But today, he wasn't writing a report. The cursor blinked, waiting, accusing. Maya's voice echoed in his memory, soft and certain. She'd been a linguist, had devoted her final years to preserving human languages. "Words don't have to solve problems, Eli," she'd said once, her hand thin and cold in his. "Sometimes they just have to reach." He'd failed to reach when it mattered. Chose work over family during Earth's collapse. Built archives while his daughter starved. Survived because he'd been elsewhere. Always elsewhere, when the people he loved needed him most. His hands shook. What right did he have to speak for humanity? He was its worst example. A man who traded presence for permanence and got neither. But maybe that was the point. He began to type, not in the clinical language of official records, but in something rawer. He structured the message using principles from humanity's ancient Voyager probes, those first hopeful bottles cast into the cosmic ocean. Light pulses, universal mathematical constants, simple words any sentient species might decode. The words came slowly, then faster. He wrote about Earth, the sound of rain on pavement, fresh bread, the peculiar weight of knowing something beautiful would end. He wrote about Maya, about failure, about the strange mathematics of love that made the inevitable worth experiencing. We built so much, broke so much, but in the breaking, we learned what love costs. He attached files, songs, children's drawings, 7 seconds of a human heartbeat, timed to match the old Voyager transmissions. He added one phrase he'd learned from Carl Sagan, back when Earth was still a pale blue dot worth remembering. His finger hovered over the transmission command. Doubt crashed through him like a tidal wave. This was narcissism, self-indulgence. Who was he to speak? Who would care? But Maya's voice whispered again. Someone might be listening. He pressed send. The message burst outward at light speed, carrying humanity's last words into a universe that had already forgotten them. The station's systems whined, straining. The life support percentage dropped to 2. 30 hours now. Elias watched the stars. Then he reached for the manual override and typed the final command he'd been avoiding for 3 years. The environmental systems, acknowledged, began their shutdown sequence. The hum that had been his only companion started to fade. He added one last line to the letter, his hands steady now. If we die, let it be knowing we tried to speak kindly. The screen went dark. The temperature began to drop. Elias Ward closed his eyes and imagined rain. In the silence of deep space, the message traveled on, a whisper in the dark, hoping someone might hear. 614 years later, Captain Seren Kale detected the impossible. Her vessel, the Equinox, had been conducting standard diplomatic surveys through the forgotten sectors when the signal appeared. Weak, ancient, repeating a communication structure no civilization had used in millennia. The linguistic analysis came back immediately. Grammatical markers indicated a species extinct since the year 2487, according to the Galactic Species Index. Homo sapiens, presumed extinct. Seren stood motionless before her console, her silver skin catching the amber light of the ship's displays. At 2.1 meters, she towered over most species, but her movements held the precise economy of her people. The Kailari did not waste energy on unnecessary gesture. Emotion was inefficiency. Logic was law. Captain, the transmission contains attached data files, reported Zix, the ship's synthetic intelligence. The AI manifested as a hovering lattice of light, its distributed consciousness processing the signal. Auditory recordings, visual art, biological rhythms. I cannot determine their purpose. Decode and display, Seren commanded. The first file resolved into sound. Melody, something the Kailari had studied but never understood. Music, humans called it. Organized noise that served no quantifiable function. This particular piece rose and fell in patterns that defied mathematical elegance. Then came the text itself, translated into standard galactic common. To whoever finds this, I hope you can still feel. Seren read on. The human Elias Ward wrote about rain, about bread, about the mathematics of impermanence. He described loss and love as if they were the same thing. He spoke of failure as if it were a teacher. The prose was inefficient, repetitive, structurally imperfect. It was the most beautiful thing Seren had ever encountered. Something wet touched her cheek. Her hand moved automatically to investigate. Clear fluid. Her medical implant triggered an immediate alert. Lacrimal pattern detected. System error. Execute diagnostic. But it wasn't an error. Seren Kale was crying. The sensation was alien, disorienting. Her chest felt compressed. Her throat closed. The text blurred before her eyes. In 43,000 years of recorded Kailari history, emotional response had been considered a cognitive flaw, bred out through generations of genetic refinement. Yet here she stood, water streaming down her silver face, feeling something that had no name in her language. Captain? Zix's voice carried an unfamiliar quality. I am experiencing processing anomalies. The text should be data, yet I find myself assigning it value beyond information content. What does the human mean by feel? Seren whispered. She played the attached heartbeat file. 7 seconds of rhythm, steady and mortal. The sound echoed through the bridge. Thump, 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 thump. It matched the cadence of those ancient Voyager probes humans had sent out centuries before their extinction. A greeting. A hope. The rhythm matched something in her own chest. Her primary circulatory organ suddenly loud in her ears. Serene accessed the Galactic Historical Archives. Humans had been the first species to send messages of greeting into space, back when their pale blue dot of a world was still whole. They'd reached out not knowing if anyone would answer, not asking for response, just hoping. She looked at the text again. The human admitted failure, admitted fear, admitted he might be wrong to send this at all. But he'd sent it anyway. "Forward this to Xenolinguistic Command," Seren ordered, her voice unsteady. "I require analysis. Captain, I must note that you are exhibiting significant deviation from standard Kalari behavioral parameters." Noted. Seren's fingers traced the screen where Elias Ward's final words glowed. "Log it as a necessary deviation." Over the next 6 hours, something unprecedented occurred. Every Kailari linguist who analyzed the text reported similar anomalies: tears, tightness in the chest, a strange pulling sensation toward something they couldn't name. The soulless letter, they began calling it. The message began replicating across galactic networks, translated into 847 languages, but the response remained uniform. The universe stopped to read, and in reading, something shifted. Seren stood alone in her quarters that cycle, staring at the star charts. Somewhere out there, in a forgotten system called Narine's Reach, a human had died, hoping someone would listen. "I heard you," she whispered to the dark. Tomorrow, she would request permission to trace the signal to its source. Tonight, she would learn what it meant to grieve someone she'd never known. The Solus Archive, as it became known, reproduced across 847 languages in 6 hours. By the third day, it had become the most transmitted document in galactic history. Seren watched it spread like a virus through civilizations. No, not a virus, a seed. In the Helion sector, 2 species locked in a century-long war declared spontaneous ceasefire. Their military commanders reported the same phenomenon. Soldiers on both sides stopped mid-engagement to read the human's letter. After, they couldn't remember why they'd been fighting. The diplomatic report that crossed Seren's desk attributed the ceasefire to collective reading, a phrase that would have been meaningless a week ago. Not everyone welcomed the change. This is contamination. Counselor Thexer stood before the Kailari High Command, his silver face rigid with controlled fury. "Captain Kyle has introduced an emotional pathogen into our civilization. The statistical evidence is irrefutable." He projected data across the chamber. Productivity in Kailari sectors had declined by 0.3%. Decision-making times had increased. Most concerning, 14% of the population reported experiencing the same lacrimal response Seren had first documented. "We are becoming irrational," Thexer continued. "Galactic Law 4701 is explicit. Emotional content that cannot be quantified cannot be legislated. This human text exists in legal paradox." Seren sat in the chamber, aware of every eye upon her. She'd neglected her duties for 3 weeks, consumed by research into the extinct species. She'd studied their art, their wars, their contradictions. The more she learned, the less sense they made. And the more she needed to understand. "The human probability calculations are instructive," she said, her voice measured despite the unfamiliar pressure in her chest. "The statistical likelihood of a solitary being affecting 1 billion sentient creatures approaches 0.0000001%. Yet it occurred. Perhaps our models are incomplete. Our models have guided civilization for 40,000 years. And in 40,000 years, none of us have cried. B. Seren stood, her height imposing even among her own kind. Until we encountered words from a species that lived brief, broken lives, and still chose kindness. The chamber fell silent. Seren could feel something shifting in the room, in herself. Fear of transformation, terror of not recognizing what she was becoming. But beneath that, something else. Something the human Elias Ward had described. Hope. Zix's voice interrupted through her neural link. Captain, I have isolated a pattern in the letter's structure. It follows a mathematical sequence. Fibonacci ratios. Human mathematics? Seren frowned. Human poetry. They embedded meaning in form. Inefficient, yet the AI paused, an impossibility for its kind. Beautiful. Before Thexer could respond, new data flooded the chamber's displays. The phenomenon was accelerating. In the outer systems, previously logical species were reporting anomalous behavior. A crystalline collective had begun producing art. The hive mind of Sector 7 had individualized. Everywhere the letter touched, certainty fractured. Some called it corruption. Others called it awakening. You speak of kindness, Thexer said quietly. But kindness is not logical. It wastes resources. It protects the weak. It serves no evolutionary purpose. Then why did it survive so long in humans? Seren countered. Why was it among the last things this Elias Ward chose to transmit? If it held no value, extinction should have eliminated it first. She pulled up historical records, fragments from humanity's first contact attempts, the Voyager probes, the Arecibo message, species after species, reaching out not for conquest or trade, but for connection, hoping someone would listen. I am requesting permission to trace the transmission to its origin point, Seren declared. Narine's reach. I believe the source may contain additional context. Denied. Thexer's response was immediate. You are compromised, Captain. Your judgment is clouded by this emotional contamination. Perhaps. Seren felt her fingers curl into fists, another irrational gesture. Or perhaps my judgment is finally clear. The tension in the chamber was palpable. Seren knew she was risking everything. Her career, her standing, her identity as a logical being. But somewhere in the darkness between stars, a human had made a similar choice. He'd risked being forgotten for the chance of being heard. The letter states, "Promise me you'll remember what it means to care." Seren said softly, "I intend to understand what he meant, with or without authorization." In the silence that followed, something unprecedented occurred. 3 other Kailari in the chamber stood, then 7 more, then 12. Thexer stared at the growing rebellion, his expression unreadable. What have we become? Seren met his gaze. Something new. The Arca Solis floated like a tomb in the binary starlight of Narine's reach. Seren's shuttle approached slowly, her hands steady on the controls despite the tremor in her chest. The station had been drifting for 6 centuries, its hull covered in cosmic dust and ice. Through the viewport, she could see the damage. Docking ports collapsed. Hull breaches sealed by vacuum-frozen atmosphere. A place where someone had chosen to die. Behind her, the Equinox waited at a distance. She'd come alone, against direct orders. Thexer's final transmission had been clear. Captain Seren Kale, removed from active service for emotional compromise. The words should have stung. Instead, she felt only certainty. The docking procedure was manual, dangerous. The station's structure groaned as her shuttle connected, metal against metal singing a mournful note. Her suit's readings confirmed the obvious. No atmosphere, no power, temperature at near absolute zero. Perfectly preserved. She entered through the emergency airlock. The interior was exactly as Elias Ward had left it. A terminal, dark now. A single chair. Through the observation port, the same view of amber and blue stars he'd watched in his final hours. Personal effects were minimal. A photograph, frozen and faded. A woman with kind eyes. Maya Chen, Serene's research had revealed. The linguist who'd taught him about the power of simple words. Serene moved deeper into the station, her suit lights cutting through 600 years of darkness. The main archive room held humanity's final records. Population graphs declining to zero. Cultural artifacts preserved with desperate care. The last acts of a species that knew it was ending. Then she found the central chamber. He sat in a maintenance chair, head tilted back slightly, eyes closed. Elias Ward, 117 years old at death. The vacuum and cold had preserved him perfectly, a statue of humanity's final moment. His face was peaceful, no terror, no regret, just rest. In his hands, he held paper. Serene's breath caught. Actual paper. Organic cellulose. A material that hadn't been produced since Earth's 21st century. The letter's original form. She'd read the digital transmission 1,000 times, but this was different. This was what he'd touched, what he'd held as his world died. Her hands shook as she carefully extracted it from his frozen grasp. The paper was fragile, crystalline with age, beginning to deteriorate even in the perfect preservation of vacuum. She had minutes before it would crumble completely. Through her helmet, she read. The words were the same, but handwritten. Each letter formed with deliberate care. In places, the ink trembled. She could see where he'd paused, where doubt had made the pen waver, where determination had pressed harder. At the bottom, a line she'd never seen in the digital version. If we die, let it be knowing we tried to speak kindly. Something broke inside her. The sound that emerged was raw, inelegant, wholly irrational. A sob. Her vision blurred with tears that made no logical sense. This man had been dead for 6 centuries. She'd never known him. Yet, kneeling here in the darkness, she felt connected across an impossible gulf. I heard you, Elias, she whispered. The whole galaxy heard you. She thought of his isolation. 3 years alone after Maya's death, watching systems fail, knowing no one would come. He could have raged, could have blamed, could have spent his final transmission cursing the universe's indifference. Instead, he'd offered a gift. The letter began to fragment in her hands, time finally claiming what it had waited 600 years to take. Serene made a decision. She wouldn't digitize it. The text already lived in networks across the galaxy. This original, this fragment of humanity's last breath, deserved something different. She placed it carefully in a preservation capsule, one that would suspend time itself. Let it be held. Let it be felt. Let it remain a physical truth that couldn't be reduced to data. Behind her, proximity alarms shrieked. The station's orbit was decaying, pulled by the binary star's gravity. She had minutes. Serene took one last look at Elias Ward, at the man who'd died hoping, at humanity's final representative who'd chosen compassion over bitterness. She reached out and gently touched his shoulder, the gesture absurd through vacuum and suit. Thank you, she said, for teaching us how to feel. The station groaned. Structural collapse imminent. Serene ran. Her shuttle detached as the Arcosolus began its final descent into stellar fire. Through the viewport, she watched it burn, a pyre 600 years delayed. The binary stars claimed their offering, and for just a moment, the light seemed to pulse. Thump, 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 like a heartbeat. Serene looked down at the preservation capsule in her lap. Inside, Elias Ward's letter rested, the last physical piece of humanity. She'd been removed from service. Her career was over. Her people thought her compromised. They were right. She'd been infected by hope, contaminated by compassion, corrupted by the simple, radical notion that speaking kindly mattered. She smiled, another irrational expression, and set course for Kailari Prime, ready to defend what she'd learned. 3 centuries passed like a long breath. Seren Kale stood before the Galactic Assembly, no longer a captain, but something new. Advocate, teacher, prophet of an extinct species. The preservation capsule rested on a pedestal beside her, Elias Ward's letter visible through its temporal suspension field. She was 342 years old now, ancient even by Kailari standards, but her eyes still burned with that first inexplicable wetness. He wrote, as if someone was listening, she said, her voice carrying across the assembled representatives of 10,000 worlds. Maybe that's why we finally did. The speech would be remembered. But it was the actions that followed that changed everything. The Treaty of Blue Breath, they called it. Established by the Galactic Assembly in the year 3695, it declared a new galactic standard, compassion as a valid diplomatic framework, not replacing logic, but complementing it, the efficiency of caring. The treaty's first clause was simple. All species would observe the Day of Blue Breath, honoring the pale blue dot that had produced humanity. A day for remembering that brief, broken, beautiful species that had taught the galaxy how to feel. Seren never saw Thexer convert. He'd attended the ceremony, stood silent as the treaty was signed, then departed without comment. Some transformations were too great. She understood. She'd almost been the same, clinging to logic because change terrified her. But others followed. The Kailari Diplomatic Corps restructured around a new principle: effective compassion. They became mediators not of cold efficiency, but of understanding. Wars ended not through superior logic, but through the simple, revolutionary question: what would it mean to speak kindly? Seren established the Institute of Compassionate Communication. Zix served as its first synthetic director, having concluded that emotional data possessed quantifiable value after all. Just not in the ways they'd thought to measure. She never married, never bonded in the traditional Kailari way. But she felt connected to something greater than herself, to a human who died hoping, to a galaxy that had learned to cry. When she was 380 years old, genetic surveys detected something remarkable. 0.003% of the Kailari population carried traces of human DNA, remnants of ancient hybridization experiments from before the extinction. The traits were re-emerging. Children born with rounder features, shorter lifespans, stronger emotional responses. The galaxy was remembering humanity at the cellular level. Seren died at 411, peacefully, having lived longer than any emotionally expressive Kailari in history. Her final words were recorded: "I never met him, but I knew him better than anyone." They buried her on a world they'd terraformed and renamed. New Solis, a pale blue dot deliberately crafted to echo Earth's lost beauty. Rain fell there, bread baked in ovens that served no efficient purpose, and in the central plaza, a monument stood. The letter itself, rotating slowly in its preservation field, catching the light of a sun that had never seen humanity but remembered them anyway. Beneath it, a plaque in every known language. He was the last of his kind, and he spoke for all of us. 1,000 years after Elias Ward's death, a child stood before that monument. She was Kailari, mostly, but her eyes were rounder than they should be, her emotional range broader. Her lifespan would be shorter, burning brighter for burning faster. "Teacher," the child asked, her small hand gripping her instructor's silver fingers, "did he know we would hear him?" The teacher, herself bearing subtle human traits, knelt beside the child. She thought of Seren Kale, of Elias Ward, of the impossible chain of connection that had transformed a galaxy. "No, little one," she said softly. "He just hoped someone would." The child stared at the letter, at the trembling handwriting of a man who'd doubted and hoped in equal measure. Why did he send it if he wasn't sure? Because hoping is what humans did best. And now, the teacher gestured to the plaza, to the city beyond, to the galaxy that had learned to feel. Now we carry that hope forward. Above them, the preservation field caught the sunlight and refracted it into patterns. If you watched carefully, if you understood the old Earth languages, you could see it. Morse code, pulsing in rhythm with the light. Stillhere. The child tilted her head, processing. Then she did something no fully Kailari child would do. She smiled, pressed her hand against the monument's base, and whispered a phrase that had become ritual. "I hear you." Across New Solus, across the galaxy, millions whispered the same words. A species that had vanished had never truly died. They lived in every tear shed for beauty, in every hand extended in kindness, in every choice to speak gently when cruelty would be easier. The last human had written a letter, and the galaxy was still reading it, still learning what it meant to care. Still here, still listening, still becoming something better because one person, alone in the dark, had hoped it was possible. In the end, Elias Ward's letter wasn't about humanity's survival. It was about its echo. He reminded the universe that to feel is not a weakness, but a form of courage. That kindness, spoken into silence, can outlast empires and even extinction. We were never meant to live forever, only to mean something while we did. What does it truly mean to speak kindly when no one might hear you? If you knew your words would be the last of your species, what would you say? Do you think compassion can outlive the ones who create it? If you felt what this story meant, write the word echo in the comments to show you stayed until the end. Tell me, from which city, world, or station are you listening? Subscribe if you believe that even a single voice in the dark can change the galaxy. Like, share, and follow the next chronicle, another fragment of what it means to be human among the stars.